Good morning. It's a Sunday, May 8th. This is my Sunday school lesson. My name is Douglas Griffin, and happy Mother's Day to everybody. Um, Let me close that. I am teaching from the book of Exodus. We go verse by verse because I just believe it gives us a better understanding of what the scriptures are saying. It's a less biased look. If you have to go verse by verse, you can't. It's harder to take things out of context. Not impossible, but it's harder. So far in the story, the children of Israel had gone down to Egypt. Part of God's plan, part of God's way of keeping them alive. In fact, Joseph says, God sent you to preserve your lives. Well, he actually said, He sent me ahead of you to preserve your lives. Because there was a worldwide famine. It lasted 7 years. 7 years. So we've been in this pandemic for a couple years and we're going crazy. So you can imagine 7 years of a famine. But they weren't supposed to stay there because God had given them, through Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, land. Now they hadn't seen it manifested yet. And what they did see in Egypt is Joseph had a really nice place for them. So it's so easy for them to stay. When their patriarch, Jacob, or we would say Israel, well, we'd say Jacob actually, passed away, they made the journey back to Canaan and buried him. Then they came back. So they were there for 17 years, buried him, came back. Didn't have to come back, could have stayed. Joseph said, when I die, please bury my bones back in Egypt. Joseph died. He was in for 70 years. 70 years he was in Egypt. He died. They had an opportunity to say, we want to take his bones, but nope. Because they'd gotten used to where they were. Then came a new Pharaoh who did not know Joseph, which changed everything. And now suddenly this Pharaoh's jealous of them. He's put them in bondage. He's increased their workloads, and he's trying to kill them in that way. It's not happening. They just keep increasing because you can't stop what God is doing. And one thing he's doing is building the children of Israel up into this mighty army. But again, he could have done that in Canaan. So they're really being disobedient. I want to be clear, and most people don't teach that. They think, no, well, God wanted them to stay in Egypt. Did he? Because he kept saying, don't stay in Egypt. In fact, he told Isaac, don't even go down to Egypt. But so, plus he'd given them land in Canaan. So why would he want them to stay in Egypt? Anyway, they were there. Sometimes we're just in Egypt. We're in Egypt. We're not where God wants us to be. God is not stumped. God is not, now how am I going to solve this? God had a solution. But he did need them to want to leave Egypt because they were going to run into opposition in Canaan. And they couldn't keep wanting to run back to Egypt, which ironically they did. They did. Anytime we don't have water, let's go back to Egypt. So they were fine in Egypt. It wasn't about God making them stay in Egypt. They wanted to be in Egypt because they had a nice place. So, but their pains got so bad, they finally wanted to at least get out. They didn't want to stay out. In fact, God had to, unfortunately, eliminate that entire generation who didn't want to stay out. They got out, but didn't want to stay out. And they really didn't trust God. They didn't want to go into the promised land. So he had to get a generation that wasn't born in Egypt. That new generation, they didn't know Egypt. They didn't want to go back to Egypt because they had never been there. Or they had been so young when they were there, that they weren't as attached to it. So that generation finally made it over. And sometimes you just have to have a new generation that didn't go through all the other things that you went through. Because that new generation is ready to move on. And it's not like the old generation wasn't useful or impactful. They played their part. And now, though, for the next part, sometimes you need a newer generation. So Moses, though, he's born in Egypt. Um, although he's Jewish, he's raised as an Egyptian from the time of 2 years old and up. He knows he's a Hebrew. I'll use that word. He knows he's an Israelite, but he's born in, I mean, but he's raised as an Egyptian, and that's what he knows until about the age of 40 when he thinks, I really am part of the tribe of Israel, and he wants to relate. And that is not uncommon for kids to reach a certain age and say, I'm Korean. I was raised by this American family, but I want to go back I went to Korea and check out and find my roots, searching for my roots. It's a pretty common thing. So he goes back and he thinks to himself, there's some reason why I've been put in this position. Maybe God having me raised by Pharaoh's daughter, maybe it's because he wants me to deliver his people. But he does it in Moses' way. And God has to break us of doing things our way. We don't automatically stop. We think that our way is right. And so and we think that our way is God's way. And we don't even consult God. There's just a way that we do things. And we assume God's on board with us. Okay, God, I'm going to go down and do this. Well, that's kind of how we pray, right? Lord, bless me as we go on our way. We don't even ask God, should we go? We just, we tell God to bless it. So Moses is down there and he sees his Egyptian beating his fellow Israelite, who he doesn't really know because he wasn't raised as one of them. But that's my people. And he kills the Egyptian, which is totally the wrong thing to do. Buries the Egyptian. The sands blow, we assume, because that Egyptian was uncovered. And the next day when he comes back to decide to be a judge over what's going on, he tells one guy, "Why are you harming your brother?" And he's not looking at them equally. He's decided who's at fault, who's wrong, and who's right. And the guy says, "You're not a judge over us. You don't get to decide what's wrong, what's right, because you killed an Egyptian yesterday. So how are you telling me what's wrong and what's right?" Which is true. I mean, the guy was right. Now, Moses was the deliverer. It's too bad he didn't say, "But here is your ministry. I can tell what God is doing." He didn't have that for him. But he was right, and Moses was exposed, and now he had nowhere to belong. Okay, I'm not an Egyptian. I've just turned my back on the Egyptians. I tried to help the Israelites, and they think I'm a murderer. So I'm out of here. And he went to Midian, and he gets married, and he's good. Like, he's let it go. He has let it go. He spends as much time in the wilderness with the Midianites as he had growing up in Egypt. So now, 40 years later, he's let go of any idea, any thought that it's all about him. Now, I made that up, and which is what's so fantastic. He wasn't manifesting his destiny. He wasn't, "Oh yes, and someday I'm going to go back there, and if you can see it, then you can make it happen." He saw the opposite. God had to talk him into it. He didn't speak it into existence. It was the opposite happening. And yet it still happened because God's the one that speaks things into existence. And then we just try to get along with his program. And you can have some wonderful thing. If God has said you can have that, it's not a problem. So he's wandering in the wilderness, and that's where we're taking. Okay, so Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and we think that Jethro is a title, like Abimelech or Pharaoh, because he's a priest of Midian, and he just was introduced to us last chapter as Ruel. So unless Jethro is his last name, but we think anyway. So he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So Horeb, this mountain that he comes to, is Sinai. Sinai and Horeb are two names of the same mountain range, and sometimes, depending on who wrote it, is Exodus and who wrote Number and who wrote Deuteronomy and who helped attribute, they use different names. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 1 and 2, it says, "In the third month, after the children of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on the same day they came to the wilderness of Sinai. For they had departed from Rephidim and had come to the wilderness of Sinai." So this is the children of Israel have left So this is once Moses' mission is complete. They go to the wilderness of Sinai and they camped in the wilderness. So Israel camped there before the mountain of God, right? So this is the mountain. In fact, the reason why Moses didn't know it was called the mountain of God because it wasn't called the mountain of God when Moses got there, when he was in the wilderness by himself. It was just a mountain. He's just trying to feed his flocks and going up and trying to find more grass. But it became known as the mountain of God. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9 and 10, it says, only take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen. I like that. Take heed and remember what you've seen. Look, remember what God has done for you, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. So this is when they're about to go and cross over. Book of Deuteronomy is a summation of here's everything that happened to us while we were in the wilderness, because we're just about to go over into the promised land and we don't want to forget the laws and what we've been taught and what happened. So he says, teach them to your children and your grandchildren, especially concerning the day you stood before your God in Horeb, when the Lord said to me, gather the people to me and I will let them hear my words, that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth, that they may teach their children. So on that day, in Deuteronomy, they're calling it Mount Horeb. In other parts, they call it Mount Sinai. I just wanted us to be clear that it's the same mountain, and I know you don't think I'm making that up. I just like to show you where it says different things in the Bible. And he says, and God is saying, gather the people, I want them to hear my words, that they may learn to fear me. And that's his reason. That's what the book of Exodus is about, is the retraining of God's people, because they had learned horrible habits in Egypt. They'd been there for a couple hundred years and had been seeped in that culture. There were no temples there for them to go to, no Bibles for them to read. All they heard every day was a steady diet of Egyptian culture and about the Egyptian gods and the Egyptian way, and they had learned to be an Egyptian. So God's having to retrain them. That's what he's doing in Egypt. I need you to come out of Egypt and I need to train you. Okay, in Exodus chapter 19, verse 18, it says, now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord descended upon it in fire, and its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. So that's the mountain, but here they're calling it Mount Sinai. And in Deuteronomy, he just called it the mountain that you gathered was Mount Horeb. So Moses is taken to this mountain. It's not a coincidence, but God's waiting. And God made sure all the grass was not working where Moses was, so that he'd have to keep going higher. Who else was at Mount Horeb? Why is that a famous mountain? Elijah went there. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 1 and 3, this mountain of God, it says, Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done and how he had executed all the prophets with the sword, all of her prophets, not the Israelite prophets. Then Jezebel sent a message to Elijah saying, let me holler at you for a minute. So let the gods do to me and more also if I do not make your life as the life of one of them prophets by tomorrow about this time. So by tomorrow, you'll be dead too. You killed all my prophets. Let me see if I can make that happen in your life. And when he saw that, oh my goodness, he arose and he ran for his life, because Jezebel is bigger than God in his mind at that point. And he went to Beersheba. God didn't tell him to go there. He just ran. He's upset, which belongs to Judah. And he left his servant there. So he went all the way from Assyria and he ran for miles down to southern Israel. Because, you didn't know what she's going to do. I heard of her. So he arose, he ate and drank. This is verse 8 of 1 Kings chapter 19. So Donna and Susan, all you guys. Okay, so it says, so he arose, he ate, he drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. Why did he go there? Because Moses had an experience on that mountain, and he thought, let me go back to that mountain where Moses had the experience with God, and maybe I'll have experience with God, because I guess God lives in that mountain. And you think that's silly that he went for 90 miles to have an experience with God, but we think that God lives at church. And he is a church, but he's also in your house. He's also in your car. He's also at the CVS pharmacy. So, anyway, but we think if we don't go to church, anyway, God's everywhere. Yes, go to church, but God's everywhere. But Elijah didn't think so. So he went to the Mount Horeb. Now, listen to this, verse 9. And there he went into a cave, and he spent the night in that place. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you Elijah had this big story. Well, she's going to kill me, and I'm the only one, and that's why I'm here. Okay, so he wanted a big spectacular show. God gave him a show, lightning and thunder and all this stuff, right? But God wasn't in the lightning. God wasn't in the thunder. He wasn't in the earthquake. Literally meaning that's not. He wanted some big fantastical experience, and sometimes that we want. That's what we want. Ooh, I heard that the power of God came and knocked everybody. I heard that this incredible thing happened, and we crave that. And God's saying, I'm not, you don't need that. You just need direction from me. You don't need some big, huge thing. But that's what Elijah wanted. And then finally it says that it was a still small voice. And that's, he says, when God, verse 13 says, so when Elijah heard that, he wrapped his face, he covered his face in his mantle because he heard God whispering to him. And he went out and he stood in the entrance of the cave. And suddenly a voice came to him, now with words, because he heard a still small voice, but he knew it was God, but he couldn't understand what the voice was saying. So, but he knew it was God, so he wrapped his face out of, thunder, lightning. He's waiting for some big word. But when he heard the still small voice, he wrapped his, and he went out to listen. And a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And the message hadn't changed. Sometimes we want the message to change. I know God said this, but I need him to address this situation over here. God's like, nah, I'm not saying nothing else until you answer my question. What are you doing here? And he went through the whole thing again. I'm the only one. And God said, go back up to Assyria and do this and do that. Like, I didn't tell you to leave. Why did you let that thing? But he wanted to have a Moses experience. Moses came to this mountain and a bush about to catch on fire, right? And let me go where Moses was. That's like, let me travel to the Holy Land. And you should travel to the Holy Land. And I want to travel to the Holy Land someday when they stop being crazy. Uh, but you don't have to go there to hear from God. God's If we just trust that God will talk to you on your bed. Anyway, so Moses is walking and has this experience in Mount Horeb, but it's Mount Sinai. It's the place where God's going to bring them back. That's why I'm saying this. Interestingly, God says, bring them right back here. And that's why I'm speaking to you here, so you know where to go with them afterwards, right? So, Exodus chapter 3, verse 2. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. Now, this is not an unusual thing for a bush to catch on fire in the Sinai desert region. That's not, it gets so dry and hot, and the sun's being out there, things will catch on fire. My lawn, I was living in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my lawn just caught on fire one day because it was so dry. The sun and then it went out, but for like 30 seconds, my lawn was on fire. What is going on? Okay, so this bush cat, that was not unusual, right? But he looked, it says, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. So that caught his attention. Huh. And so God's giving a message here because this fire is self-perpetuating and eternal. How does he know that? Because it wasn't burning up anything because it would need fuel to do that. Like if I was to go to the middle of the street and set a paper on fire, once the fire consumed that paper, it would be gone, right? This fire wasn't burning the bush. It's saying, I'm here to stay. I'm not burning anything, and I don't have a source. Your fire on your stove stays on because it has a fuel source, right? He's saying, I don't need, this fire's like, I'm self-sufficient, I'm eternal, I'm not going anywhere, I'm just here. So he says, I got to look at that because fires don't do that. Fires consume things. They're not just pretty. So I have to look at that. Why did God appear as fire? In Isaiah chapter 33, verse 14, God's mad because that's what he is a lot, right? Because we keep messing up. So it says, the sinners in Zion are afraid. Fearfulness has seized the hypocrites. So these are not great people, these are bad people. Who among us shall dwell with the devouring fire? Who among us shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Because that's how they're describing God if you are bad. These are the hypocrites, the sinners. It's like, oh no, it's fire, it's everlasting burnings. But who wants to dwell with that? Who wants to live with fire? Verse 15 says, he who walks righteously and speaks uprightly, he who despises the gain of oppressions, who gestures with his hands, refusing bribes, who stops his ears from hearing of bloodshed. I don't want to hear of that. La, 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 la. I don't want to keep hearing about all that. And shuts his eyes from seeing evil. That person, they don't mind the fire because the fire doesn't consume them. And God wants to appear that way on purpose. I can either be this wonderful thing that brings light, cook your food, or this consuming thing. But it depends on you, because fire doesn't change. Fire doesn't get mad at the newspaper. I'm going to burn that newspaper, but I'm going to cook that food because I like food. The quality is the same. It depends on what we put in the fire, what fire does. But fire just does what it does. So that's on purpose. God's saying, I am what I am, right? How you approach me determines how it affects you. Okay, so Exodus chapter 3, verse 3. So he sees this burning bush and he says to himself, I will now turn aside and see this great sight. Why the bush does not burn? I need to figure this out. God knew what would attract his attention. Exodus chapter 3, verse 4. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, so Moses had to do something first. Moses had to go, let me investigate why this is not, how can a fire just sit there and not need fuel and not consume what it. So when God saw that, he turned aside to look. Then God called to him from the midst of the bush. God could have called to him first, but there's something that Moses had to do first, right? And God didn't need to set a bush on fire. Moses is wandering around. God could have said, hey, Moses. But he needed, there's steps that Moses had to take for God to call to him. And sometimes just God is waiting for us to take a step. He has a plan for some reason. So Moses needed to become again, Moses has an arrogance problem. I was raised in Pharaoh's house. I can go around killing people if I want. And I'm your deliverer. And Moses thought a lot of himself. And God had to totally humble that and say, you follow me. I don't follow you. You don't make decisions and kill people and expect me to cover it up. You follow my lead. So Moses, you take a step toward me, because that's the training Moses needed, right? So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am, which is just a normal, that Moses wasn't saying anything profound. That's like, yeah, here, like present, when the teacher calls your name. Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. Then he said, do not draw near this place. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Now, you can come here, but not in your sandals. What's wrong with the sandals? The sandals are the things that have been in contact with the world. The sandals have gone here and there, and he says you have to the part of you that has been in contact with the world, let that go. Then you can come before me. And when we come before God, truly come before God, we let go of all the things that have been in contact with the world, and we're just holy there. We're on His ground. My wife and I have this joke. When you realize that you are in the presence of someone who totally owns you, we say, we own Mr. Gilmore property now, which is from Roots, because Kunta Kinte thought he could do things like he did back in Africa, and Fiddler had to tell him, no. I don't know if it was Fiddler, but one of the characters said, you own Mr. Gilmore property, don't work like that anymore. You're on the plantation now, he's in charge. And that's what God is saying, I'm in charge here. It's all about me here. So you take off anything that's been in touch with the world. You come stand before me, and this is wholly 100% me that you need to focus on. And if God could get our 100% concentration, our lives would be enhanced. If he doesn't get our 100% concentration, God still is able to move in our lives. But our lives would be enhanced if we could just let go of everything and just come before his presence and totally focus on him, because he needs to get our complete attention so he can give us the instructions that we need, or he would desire to do that. But that's anybody. It's like you say, hey, listen to me, look at me when I'm talking to you. Stop being on your phone, or right. You want someone, because you don't want them to miss part of it because their mind is also somewhere else. Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. The Israelites have finally crossed over the Jordan. It says, and it came to pass when Joshua was by Jericho, so they haven't attacked it yet. In fact, they're not clear. He's not clear what they're supposed to do. So when he's near Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man stood opposite him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? For them or us? So the man said, no, which is a great meaning, neither. He says, as commander of the army of the Lord, I have now come. I'm come directly from the presence of God. I need to get your full attention because of these instructions. You cannot imagine what I'm about to say, and I don't want you to add to it or subtract to it, so I need your full attention. So he said to him, so Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshiped, which is appropriate, cover your face. And he said to him, what does my Lord say to his servant? Then the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take your sandals off your foot, for the place where you stand is holy. And Joshua did so. So you've been traveling all these places, doing all these things, Joshua. You need to let all that go. You're standing before me, and this is God's emissary, right? His messenger who's giving them this message. I need your complete attention. Let go of anything. Turn off the television, turn off all the distractions, 100% focus. John chapter 13, verse 8 through 10, it says, the supper being ended. This is the Last Supper. Jesus is giving the Last Supper, the Passover supper, before he's about to be crucified. He needs their 100% full attention. He also needs to explain a concept to them. So it's a supper being ended, and the devil already having put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. So Judas got his mind made up. Judas has his mind made up, and the disciples are there. They've had supper. It says Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, which is an interesting thing. Jesus knows it's done. It's done. It's done, right? So I got to do these last little things for the disciples, but my part is done. And that he had come from God and was going to God. So Jesus knew all these things. All things are in my hand. I come from God. I'm going to God. I'm in the presence of God right now. He says he rose from supper and he laid aside his garments and he took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet. This is similar as take your sandals off. I'm going to wash your feet. I'm washing away the dirt of everywhere you've been today, everywhere you've been, because I want to explain a concept to you, trying to demonstrate a concept to you, because sometimes we have to come before the presence of God. We have to let go of all that stuff. The argument that you had with that person, get it out of your mind for a little bit. Wash your mind. That thing, that bill you're worried about, just get all that out of your mind and just receive from the Lord. So let me wash this dirt off your feet, right? Then he came to Simon Peter, and Simon Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Duh. But he's mean, like, why? You're the man in charge. I don't understand why you're washing. So he's explaining the principle of you can be the person in charge and still be a servant. Being in charge doesn't mean you give all the orders and I'm in charge. Sometimes that means you're the servant. So Jesus answered and said to him, what I am doing, you do not understand now, but you will know after this, because you'll get it. He says, and Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet, which is stupid. I'm doing it. No, Jesus, let me correct you, God. And we correct God. God, you had the wrong person win. God, you gave me the wrong amount in my check. We correct God. God does stuff and we go, God, that's not right. So we think Peter's stupid, but we correct God. Okay, if I do not wash you, you have no part with me. And let me explain. They are about to deny him. They don't know it, but a couple hours from now, they're going to scatter. They're going to desert him, leave him, and deny him. And he's going to be crucified. Only person there was John. And they're going to hate themselves for it because they weren't there when he was taken, when he was crucified. I mean, I guess they was there when he was taken, but as soon as he was taken, they left. Only John and Peter followed. The rest of the disciples scattered. And at the crucifixion, they weren't there. They weren't any part of it. So this man who dedicated their life to them, they deserted him and they didn't betray him and denied him. They need to know they were forgiven, or they weren't going to be able to have any part. They weren't going to be able to move on. But Jesus would not be there to forgive them. He'd be in the grave, and so let me forgive you now. Let me wash your feet of the dirt, because if I don't do this now, and you understand that as an act of forgiveness, and wash that away from you, you won't have any part with me. You'll just be all upset and, oh no, I'm terrible. So you need to know you're forgiven. So Simon Peter says to him, Lord, well, then not my feet only, because he doesn't get it. He doesn't understand. But also my hands and my head. I mean, if that's how I have a part with you. And Jesus said to him, no, he who is bathed need only to wash his feet. You've been saved. You don't need to get saved all over again every time you mess up. He who's bathed, you only have to wash your feet, the part of that's come in contact with the world. You don't need to rebathe every time you touch a handle of a door and, oh, let me pour this all over my body, this sanitizer. So he's saying, when we've been saved, we only have to worry about that part. We don't. Some people used to get saved every Sunday, every time they'd sin. They go down. You don't have to get resaved. You don't have to get rebaptized every time you do something wrong. He who is bathed, Jesus said, he's only to wash his feet, but is completely clean, and you are clean. So I don't want you to think this is taking away your salvation. There's just this last little thing that you need to understand. I washed your feet as my act of forgiveness to you. That's what he's saying. And this last little bit of denial is going to make you crazy. And I need you to let go of it and stop. He says, so you are clean. Don't worry, you are clean. He said, not all of you, because he's talking about Judas. Because Judas, you're the only one who does not believe that I'm the Messiah at all, and you never will. So Exodus chapter 19 is another place where God is saying, I am holy, and remove your sandals. To Moses, he's saying, remove your sandals. Here's what he says to the whole congregation who's out there in front of Sinai. In Exodus chapter 19, verse 20, it says, the Lord came down upon Mount Sinai, on top of the mountain, same mountain where Moses had been, where Moses met him in the burning bush. And the Lord called Moses to the top of the mountain. So Moses went up, and the Lord said to Moses, go down and warn the people, lest they break through to gaze at the Lord. Now, they're not coming to worship the Lord. They're not coming to bow down in holiness. They just, like they're sightseeing, like you stop at an accident, right, on the freeway. You just looking. You're not there to help. You're not there to administer aid. You just want to, oh, look at that. Oh. And so that's, right. Now people are filming stuff with their cell phones. But I don't, oh, look, that person's dying. Let me film them. So if that's your purpose, don't come up here. If they're just coming to gaze at me, lest it says many of them will perish, because then that fire that I am is going to burn them and consume them, as opposed to give them light. So you can come up here because you're now coming with the right attitude, but don't tell them to come up here, right? So he's making this is whole. If my full presence is there, this place is now holy, and you need to let go of all this stuff and come before me correct. Come correct. Okay. Exodus chapter 3, verse 6. So moreover, he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. So he's identifying who he is, because Moses has heard about a bunch of gods now. For 200 years, they've been seeped in Egyptian culture. Egyptians have gods of the water, and the god of the mountain, and the god of fertility, and the god of learning, and all sorts of gods, right? All sorts of gods. And again, the Israelites, they've never personally met God. Abraham did, Isaac did, Jacob had a personal experience, and then they came down, they followed Jacob down to Egypt, and they have not had their own personal experience with God. at all. They just only heard about other gods. And so they're believing in other gods. Trust me, after 200 years of being indoctrinated a certain way, they believe in other gods. So he has to reintroduce himself to Moses, as he will have to reintroduce himself to the people and get them to let go of all those other gods. So he says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Here's how Jesus interpreted what this moment means. In Matthew chapter 22, verse 32. The Sadducees, the Pharisees are kind of quizzing Jesus. It's really the Sadducees about the resurrection, because they don't even believe in the resurrection. They're trying to make him see the fallacy in his argument. You believe the resurrection, but let me correct you here and see if I can trick you, Jesus, because there's no resurrection. So he says, concerning the resurrection of the dead, and they were Jewish. They just didn't believe in the resurrection. They believe you're here, YOLO. You only live once, and that's it. And so we should get the most out of life and then die. But concerning the resurrection of the dead, Jesus says to them, have you not read what was spoken to you by God, saying, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. And they're going, wait, but Abraham and Isaac and Jacob are dead. What do you mean God is not the God of the dead, but of the living? Jesus is saying that they're not dead. Yeah. Surprise. They're alive. They're alive. Their spirit is alive with me. When he says, I am the God of Abraham, I am the God, I mean, I currently am their God. And so just because that body is dead, they're still alive. So you don't believe in resurrection? Guess what? Abraham is alive right now. Moses, because he didn't say I was their God and then they passed away. He says that's why the scriptures say I am the God. And the Sadducees thought from the scriptures they could prove there was no resurrection. And Jesus is like, I know the Bible a little better than you because I helped write it. I was there. So I am the God means I currently am their God. Surprise. And that's what he's saying to Moses. I am currently their God. And I'm also the God of your father, and I'm going to currently be your God if you let me, In Romans chapter 14, verses 8 through 9, it says, for if we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord, meaning we go to the Lord. We live before the Lord. To the Lord means we live in front of him. He sees us. And if we die, we're dying before the Lord. He still sees us. We're there. Nothing has happened. Therefore, whether we live or die, we are the Lord's. We still belong to him, and we're in his presence. For to this end, Christ died and rose and lived again. So Christ demonstrated it. He was alive, then he died, and he rose and lived again to demonstrate that there is a resurrection. You just won't be in this body. That he might be Lord of both the dead and the living. So those who have died and left their bodies, they're still alive, and Christ is their Lord, and the living in these bodies are still alive. There's no difference. You just take off this suit. That's all that has happened. So, Exodus chapter 3, verse 6, Moses hid his face. Remember, Elijah hid his face in his mantle when he realized God was speaking to him. Because Moses didn't know, why is this bush burning? And then suddenly the bush starts talking, but the fire starts talking, and why is this just fire that's talking to me? Nope, this is God talking to me. So he hides his face, which was their appropriate sign of, I don't have the right to look you in the eye. I'm not your equal, right? That's how their culture expresses that. So he hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. It's God. I have no right to look on the person who owns the universe. Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. So he doesn't say I've seen it, I have surely seen. So he uses these double, that means the word surely is not there. It's the word seen is there twice. I have seen, like I have really seen. Another example of this where we had the same word repeated twice was in Genesis 2:17. When God's talking to Adam and Eve and says, but the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. There's a million trees you can eat. Just this one don't eat. For in the day of you eat, you shall surely die. But it doesn't say surely. It says you shall die. You shall double die. Dying thou shalt die. So it's a double death, right? You're going to die spiritually, which will eventually lead to your physical death. You'll be cut off. He's saying, I have surely seen, I have doubly seen, I have really, really seen I've been there while it was happening. It didn't just draw my attention. I was watching the whole time. This is one of those uh, questions of, so because I want you to just imagine this picture of, oh, maybe the now we've got monitors and everything, right? So the kids are downstairs playing, and you got this little camera. They don't know, and they're messing around, and they're down playing dominoes or whatever they're doing, and you're watching the whole thing in the monitor. I've seen. Uh, you watch the whole thing, and now you're going to go open the door and see in person, but you were seeing it the whole time. Don't think that when you open that door open, that was the first time that I've seen what's going on. I've been there, and he's got to give this impression because they haven't talked about God for 200 years in Egypt. They've told some old stories, possibly, but they have accepted these other gods. In fact, that's why Moses is going to ask him, which God shall I say has sent me back to them? Because they believe thoroughly there's just a bunch of gods. And that each God has its region, because that's what the Egyptian teach. There's a God in the mountains. So when you're in the mountains, you pray to that God. You appease that God. When you're in the valley, you appease that God and bring him a gift. When you're crossing the ocean, you appease the ocean God. When you're wherever you are. So everybody, God has this region. So they don't think that God that was in Canaan, that spoke to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has any idea what was going on in Egypt, because he lives in Canaan. Again, like we believe God lives at church. We don't think that God is in the parking lot after church, so we can act up after church, because we think, well, that God lives in the pulpit. He doesn't live anywhere else. So they thought, he's thinking, you just live in the mountain. And I want them to know, I was there when they were striving through all the stuff that they've gone through. I was there. I saw it all. I didn't miss any of it. I was there. I wasn't in Canaan. Okay. So Exodus chapter 3, verse 7. So I've doubly seen, and I've heard their cry because of their taskmasters, for I know their souls. I know what's going on. So I've come down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. I'm coming down now. So you know how the kids, it could be upstairs playing, or the kids could be downstairs playing, or we could be the kids, and the parent says, hey, be quiet down there. Don't make me come down there, right? So, because that's not going to be good. So when God's saying, I'm now coming down, if you've been messing up, that's not good. If you've been doing good, then it's not a problem. The principal's coming down here, and that either panics you, oh no, or like, good, because the principal's on my side. He's going to tell you knuckleheads that you need to shut up. So hearing, ooh, the teacher's coming, for some of the goody goods, like, yay, the teacher's coming back, because that's a good thing. And for those who've been doing bad, it's like, oh no, the teacher's not coming, So when God shows up, I don't mean it's always a bad thing, but that means I'm not have to show up. And so all things will be straightened out. So now I'm coming down to deliver them out of the hand of the Egyptians. And here's a couple times that phrase was used. You'll recognize it. Genesis chapter 11, verse 5. And they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. This is when they're building the Tower of Babel. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Let's be one people. We'll be mighty, and we'll reach to the heavens. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of man had built. So it's not like the Lord didn't see it. And again, the parent hears all that noise. Hey, be quiet. Hey, he hears the noise. It's not like that's the first time. But I keep saying, don't make me come down there, because something's going to happen if I do. So God saw it. It's not like, let me come down so because I can't really see. He knows what's going on. He just keeps waiting for him to figure out, we need to stop playing around. Okay, I'm going to have to come down. In Genesis chapter 18, verse 20 to 21, and the Lord says, because of the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will come down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come up to me. And if not, I will know. So, and he knows that he's expressing it in language that they will understand. I'm going down now. But again, the parent has heard you messing around the whole time. You can hear the laughing and the screaming. What's wrong with us kids? Why don't we think the parents can hear us? Because we just forget. Stop jumping on that bed. Okay. Let me jump on the bed. We wait 5 minutes, like they can't hear it. So God saw, he's not saying, let me go down. But he's saying, now I'm going to go down and I'm going to open the door. I'm going to look in the room and see, is that bed a mess like I think it is? Because he knows it is, and it will be, because the parents aren't stupid. The door burst open and there you are in the middle of whatever you weren't supposed to be doing. Exodus chapter 19, verse 18 and 19. Now Mount Sinai was completely in smoke because the Lord came down upon it, right? In fire, its smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace, and the whole mountain quaked greatly. And when the blast of the trumpet sounded long and became louder and louder, Moses spoke, and God answered him by voice. So this is God coming, and again, to Moses, it wasn't a problem. To the people who were messing up, it was a problem, because they were truly messing up. So I'm just saying, God showing up is not a problem unless you've been messing up. Exodus chapter 3, verse 8. He says, I'm going to come down and I'm going to bring them up from that land to a good and large land, to a land flowing with milk and honey. So who's it going to be a problem for? It's going to be a problem for the Egyptians. So he says, I've seen what's been going on. I've been giving the Egyptians a chance to stop and realize the wickedness of their ways. And also I've been allowing this bondage to convince you that you need to leave Egypt, because you're going to want to go back. I know it's incredible, but you're going to want to go back. And so I'm accomplishing two things at once. And I'm also getting Moses to let go of all his crap so that he will listen to me and obey me and not do his own thing. If only that worked. So then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. And truly, so I'm sorry, he uses the word, I'm going to bring them up to a land that is flowing with milk and honey. And this is the thing that will lure them out. It's flowing with milk and honey, because they're in a nice place in Egypt. Even though they're under all that bondage, Joseph picked out a nice place for them. So the only way to get them to go to Canaan, which now just sounds like a scary place, is to tell them it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Do not worry. It'll be fine. So then they told him and said, so when they sent out spies to that land, because none of them have been to Canaan. At this point, this generation, they've never been to Canaan, and their fathers hadn't been to Canaan, and their grandfather. Now, their great-grandfathers came from Canaan, but their grandfathers, fathers, and themselves, because it was 4 generations there, had not ever been. So they had no idea what the land looked like, and no telling what stories they told. So they sent spies out, and they said, we went to the land where you sent us, and truly, it does flow with milk and honey. And this is his fruit. In fact, we brought back its grapes. We brought back all this stuff. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong, right? And so they went, but God don't know what he's talking about. That milk and honey thing was key to make them want to go. This is what Caleb used in order to try to convince them to ignore those other spies. In Numbers 24:8, if the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into the land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. They just told you it flows with milk and honey, but just don't rebel against God, right? So this milk and honey thing, now here's what it meant to them. Deuteronomy 8, chapter 7. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains, of springs that flow out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And when you've eaten and are full, then you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land which he's given you. So that's what it meant to them, flowing with milk and honey. It didn't mean that everywhere you stepped in a pool of milk and honey, and because that's going to mess up my sandals. That's what it translated to them. So God wants to tell them, I'm going to take them to a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites. Back to Exodus chapter 3, verse 8. And the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites. Now, when you hear all those ites, just know that the Canaan is their daddy, and all of these ites came from him. So the Canaanites were not Canaanite was the name of the whole group. Excuse me, like the United States of America each state is separate, but it's called America. But California is not called America. New York's not called America. Florida's not called Texas. Not called America. America's called America. That's the name of the whole umbrella name, and then each individual thing. So the Canaanites were the name of the whole thing. In Genesis chapter 10, verse 15, when it's talking about the sons of Noah and Ham, and Ham had a son named Cush who went and founded Ethiopia, and a son named Mizraim, which is the name for Egypt, but he had Canaan, that's his youngest son. It says, and Canaan begat Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, the Jebusite, the Amorite, the Girgashite. All these ites came from Canaan, and they stayed in that one place. They didn't go south, they didn't go east. They stayed in that one place. So the Canaanites, the tribe that came from Canaan, not from Cush, not from Ethiopia, not from Egypt, just that one group that came from Canaan, they were cursed. They were the Sodom and Gomorrahites and the Tower of Babelites and that whole group. They hated them some God. And so he's saying that they're there, but that land supported those 5 groups. There are really 10 groups altogether, but 4 of them kind of disappeared after a while. So there's 5 or 6 groups that he mentions and saying that land is rich enough to support all of them. So you know it can support you. Now, therefore, behold, the city, this is Exodus chapter 3, verse 9. Now, therefore, himself to Moses. This is who I am, and I know what's going on, and I'm ready to deliver you. Now, how Moses responds to all this, we'll go over next week. And how we respond to God's call. We have a call in our lives, whatever that call is. We can see ourselves sometimes in Moses. We can learn from what he learned. So I'm going to stop there. And I am preaching at 11 o'clock, and it'll be about 11:10 by the time I get up today. So if you want to go to the Good Shepherd NBCLA, it also will be on my Facebook page. And we're in the book of Joshua, the 15th chapter of Joshua. Very interesting lesson to me. Of course, I say it's interesting. Okay, so I am going to sign off here, and happy Mother's Day, and we'll talk to you either next week.